Hi there. I just wanted to give you a little bit of feedback on the assignment from last week, your interview analysis write-up, and also some tips for the assignment you're working on this week. And just thought this might be an easy way to provide some general feedback to everyone. So it'll be a little rough, but bear with me. So this is the slide deck that you were to do your analysis on. And so I gave you the first half of the report already completed. And I did this for two reasons. One, because reading through this gives you context for the study you were analyzing, which you really needed to understand, but also because this first part is what you're going to be doing for your assignment for this week. So we are going to come back and talk about that in just a little bit. But first, I did want to note one thing that I did not have you do on last week's assignment, but that you will need to do typically for one of these reports, and that is this executive summary here. So the first slide, you should notice on the template you were given, it was blank because I meant to have you fill it in and I just forgot. So you kind of got off the hook there. But the executive summary on a report, as you should recall, just does what it says. It summarizes the whole study. So it's a quick one-page summary designed for busy executives. So if they just want to get the gist of the key point highlights of a study, they can do that and then decide if they want to dig further into the report. So this one actually does include that information. And so it's just a summary. It tells a little bit. You'll see here about what happened, like what the particular focus group is about, and then some of the main insights and the results. Now, this is a sample from a student in the class, so it isn't perfect. I would actually like to see a little bit more detail on this executive summary on some of the specific findings from the study, but still, it's pretty good. So something to keep in mind. Now, you can't prepare the executive summary until you're completely done with the whole report. Like I said, that has to wait until the very end, but it is something that you would need to do when writing up a complete report. It's not something you'll have to do for your assignment this week because you're only going to be writing up the proposal. So you won't have any results yet to write up. So you can just leave that slide blank. And like I said, we'll come back to the beginning of the report. But I do want to really emphasize one part before we dig back into the results you were supposed to do, and that is the study goals and objectives. So recall that what Knott's is interested in is finding charitable organizations they fit their target audience, right? So they wanted to get recommendations on what messages the visitors are receiving, how can we get visitors and employees involved in community relations and outputs, and how do partnerships incentivize visits to Knott's. So what types of charitable work can they do that still would then make people excited about coming to the park? So that's where you get the connection back into coming to Knott's Berry Farm, but they weren't interested in ideas for how to change the park, what to do better, what new attractions, how to give discounts to get people in the door. They were really interested in what people would perceive as good community relations and nonprofit partnerships. So that's what you should really be looking for out of the analysis in this focus group. Now, I recognize that they covered a lot of topics in that focus group. Keep in mind that this was a student project, and so it wasn't perfect. They kind of went a little more broad than I would have ideally thought that they should do, and rather than narrowing in and focusing on community relations and partnerships. So it's fine if you got insights that you might tell the client that they should do just to the park in general, but you just wouldn't really want to focus your report predominantly on that because that's not what they were interested in. So it's always important to start here because this is what's guiding your analysis. It's guiding the design of your study, and then it's guiding the results. So you should ask questions that are going to help you answer these objectives, and you should ask specific interview questions that are going to reflect your research questions. So that's what you want to do in designing the study, and then how you would want to focus your analysis. So I did want to just kind of state that up front. Now, so we dig down into the write-up. Now, again, it details the population, sampling frame, and like I said, we'll come back and take a look at that. But for now, the report that you did last week was just doing the analysis from the study that they had already conducted. So the first thing that you were supposed to do is write about the participant profiles. So here we have an example of that, where each person's name is listed and some details are provided based on those pre-surveys that were asked. So the whole point of the pre-surveys is just to collect that demographic and kind of background information, so you get a sense of who your participants are, what their similarities and differences are, so you can keep that in mind as you do the results. Now, most of you did a great job on this part of the report. Some people just kind of did it more shorthandy in shorthand term rather than kind of writing it out in a nicer narrative, but most of you did a pretty good job on that part of the report. Where I know people struggled a little bit is just in the results, and I know it's a lot to synthesize very quickly, and so I think in some cases maybe you didn't get through as much of that analysis as you would have liked, but I do want to kind of focus on some highlights here. So this is a particularly well done example. So you'll see here first it starts off with having the main findings, and so those are just kind of overview. So these are the key themes that the analysis pulled out for their analysis, and then it's followed up with slides for each one, backing up each one of these results. So again, first off, these results are focused not on what the organization should do. That's in the implications and the recommendations. In your results, you're only focusing specifically on summarizing what people actually said in the focus group itself. You're going to wait to talk about the implications of that and what you recommend for the implications and recommendation sections of the report. In the results, it's just summarizing the findings. So this is an overview of the findings, and then that's followed up with slides that relate right back to this same organization. So this first listing here is best ways a business can engage with the community, and the next slide is best ways a business can engage with the community. And now it has sub-themes related to that concept of best ways a business can engage with the community. So the first comment in here is most participants agreed that a business trying to get involved should either provide discounts or provide something free for families, and it has quotes to support that. Then you'll see that there's a second slide, another slide here with the same main theme, best ways a business can engage with communities, and then another sub-theme underneath that. Some others felt that businesses wanting to engage should get involved with other local businesses, charities, or schools. And then it details that a little bit more. And then yet there was a third insight for the same main theme, best ways a business can engage. Some others felt that the business, one more down here. A few of the participants offered suggestions to engage and get involved with the community in a positive way. And so that's included there. So again, you see here you've got 5 main themes, but within those themes, there were several sub-themes. So then the next one was preferences for corporate involvement in charities, and you'll see here that there were a few kind of insights related to that main theme, and then theme parks, charity, and community involvement. And so it's laid out. Again, honestly, in our focus group, there are probably more than these 5 main themes and insights that you can take away. But what I liked about this particular example is it does stay largely focused on engaging with the community and nonprofit partnerships, and doesn't go too far into we should make the park more updated and have new attractions and more things for kids, and some of those things, which all might be good ideas and things that the focus group touched on, but that aren't necessarily, if you're going to prioritize, particularly in not having a lot of time to do that thorough of analysis, what you want to pull out for this report. You really want to kind of hit those highlights on what's relevant to what NODS asked you for. So those are the results written up, and then we get into the implications and recommendations. So that's where, based on these results here, you're going to talk about, well, based on what the people said, what would you recommend that NODS does? So in this case, they talk about some insights gained, community involvement, do not do one-time events, but rather stay involved, like with a consistent partner. That's a theme that they felt came out from the results, and talking about a self-select list where the donor can choose the charities and be transparent with where the funds are going. So those are all things that if you went up and kind of really read through these results, that really were kind of supported by those results. Now, other examples of reports that I really liked directly actually with lists and implication, a recommendation, like, so list, do not do one-time events, stay consistent with those involved, and some even included some quotes or some support specifically for that particular recommendation. And that's fine too. But as long as it was detailed up in the results and it's clear, that's good. Now, this one only had 3 implications and recommendations. I think you might be able to dig out a few more, but it still provides, some clarity that you're understanding how you can use the focus group results to guide decision making, which is the whole point. And then last, the limitations. So these limitations, many of you noted, did pretty well with the limitations. To the fact that there was only one focus group, that there was only one group of people identified, and that's true. That is a limitation. But some of you said, well, there was only certain types of people, but you do want to remember that in one focus group, you do want people to be as alike as possible. So you don't want to mix a bunch of different types of people together, because then it's hard to find common themes. That said, if you want to know about more than just one tiny little segment, what you would want to do in a perfect world is a lot of focus groups with, so that you did a couple of focus groups with one subset and a couple focus groups with another subset. So that's what you would want to do. Now, I did want to point out that in this limitations, many of you have hit some of the highlights, but there are really a lot of limitations. And one of the things that I want you to get out of this course is be able to be critical of different designs and understand what they can do for you and what they can't. And so I did want to draw your attention here to this lesson from last week on interview research uses and limitations. So in this lesson from last week, it included some information about limitations of focus groups and one-on-one interviews. So you could go through this list of advantages and limitations and see how they relate and how they apply to that specific focus group. And also there's some general limitations of interview research to consider down here. So what I was hoping that you would do in assessing that focus group last week is kind of think through all of these possibilities and how they might apply to that particular focus group. So most of you did pretty well, but if you were trying to figure out, well, how do I get to that 100, there's a lot of insights that you might have added in. So I wanted to show you that. And this week, you are asked to design an interview study for Juice It Up. Now, you as a team will need to decide whether you think realistically if you might choose to do this for your primary research, if doing a focus group would make sense, or if you might instead want to do one-on-one interviews. And that's something that your team should probably try and sort out. And ideally, maybe you'd like to do a focus group, but can you get all together and get people together in one place? If you can, great. If not, you might just do in-depth interviews, come up with some interview questions, and then each person on your team could interview a couple of people. You could transcribe it, and you could analyze your results that way. So if it's easy to get people together, or do a video focus group session where you can get everyone together and transcribe that and analyze it, that's fine too. But you just need to think realistically about which format makes sense. And that's what you're supposed to talk about in the discussion forum. If you haven't already done that, like what questions would we want to, just generally speaking, what kinds of information do we want to have that an interview could help us with? So what are your questions for your study or your objectives? And then who would we want to study? How would we do it? So you're kind of thinking practically for a real study you might do, so that way when you do your proposal this week, your team's kind of all on the same page and your proposals will be a little bit more similar. So if you decide to do that for your primary research project, you will, you'll just kind of already be further along in developing your idea. So I hope that makes sense. So to that end, this week, you're going to be designing a proposal. So I know that may sound like a lot, but really it's not as much as it might seem. So you're going to basically do the same thing that's here for NOTS. Like I said, you can't do the executive summary yet for the proposal because the study won't be done. And you don't have to worry about a table of contents particularly yet. You can do it up to while you're done. But again, that can be added in later. But you do want to have you can do an overview, but basically you can do a background. So you would give a background on Juice It Up, why you would be doing the study, what's the point in doing your interview study. You'll set your study goals and objectives. So you'll articulate very specific First, you want to put down the client goals from the RFP, right? And then you want to list the specific research objectives for your study for Juice It Up. And then you're going to get into your method, right? And you're going to talk about who you would be sampling. So your population, in this case, you're probably going to be focusing on your college age audience, right? So who they are, your sampling frame, people that you know, right? And your sampling strategy, very similar probably to what was done for knots, right? And your sample size. And again, if it's going to be a focus group, you're going to maybe target ideally, again, at the minimum 5 people, but I would say try and invite at least 10 and see how many people you get. And then if you're going to do interviews, if you have a team of 4, if you each do 2, that would be 8, and that would be reasonable. So you would put that there. Your procedures, will be talking about how you do it. So did you interview, did everyone in your team interview people, 2 people? Did you do a web focus group? Did you have people meet in person for a focus group? How did you do it, right? And again, if you're doing a focus group, you only really need 1 moderator. They did 3 because they were letting people practice and it was a bigger team and group, but you don't have to do it that way. Their procedures is just detailing exactly how you think you would collect your data. Now, you're saying what you're going to do. You're not doing it this week. You're just outlining a proposal. That said, you might want to go ahead and write it in past tense, because that way, if you decide to go ahead and do this, you don't have to actually go back and change it later. So it's fine to write it up as if it already happened, even though it hasn't. Okay? Then your measures. In your measures section, you can't do until you actually design your question guide, which is the other thing you're going to do for the workshop this week. You're going to write up this proposal and you're going to write up your question guide. So when you write up your question guide, which is going to be just your list of questions that you would ask the participants, then here you can summarize that. So you might think of a few different areas of questions that you're going to ask, and then you can give kind of some examples of the questions that were asked. Now, keep in mind that the focus group for knots was really all over the place. They covered a lot. It was a big amount of material. I don't expect you to cover that many different areas of topics and have that much going on for your interview research that you might propose for Juice It Up. It would actually be probably better to keep it more focused. And what you want to be focusing on at this point is narrowing in on the strategies that you're already thinking about. So if you're already considering a few ideas for what you think Juice It Up might do to get college age people excited about juicing, use this focus group to get support for those ideas. Is this really how people are thinking? Are we sure we're confident in what they already think about juicing, or what they think about Juice It Up, and about what might appeal to them? So really use those questions to get that insight so that you can kind of tell Juice It Up, see, don't just take our word for it. Here's what people are saying, why we think that this would be a good idea. I hope that makes sense. So you'll summarize what those measures are, and then that's it. For this part, you can't do the participant profiles or results yet because that won't be done. You can go ahead and go down here and add in anticipating some of the limitations that you know are just typical of interview research. And then when you went back and actually did the study, you might think of more limitations just with how it played out or what happened, but you can already know that you're going to be limited by the number of people you have and your ability to recruit them, and a bunch of other things. So you can put that in there. So I hope that makes sense for this week. Like I said, for this week, then you will just be filling in the first part of the report, the part that you didn't fill in for the last workshop because it was already done. You're going to fill in that first part and the limitations section, but you are also going to have to create that discussion guide. Okay, so for your discussion guide, what you want to be looking at is the lesson from this week, Interview Research Materials. And in that lesson, it gives some detailed guidelines for how to develop a good discussion guide questions. And remember, your discussion guide questions, the questions you're actually asking your participant, are not the same thing as your research questions or objectives. They're obviously very related, but your research questions or objectives are much more general about the types of information you want to have. And then the actual questions on your discussion guides are the direct things you're going to ask the people in your interviews. So this provides guidelines on the types of questions that are appropriate, what types of questions aren't appropriate. So that's really what you want to focus on. It gives you a step-by-step guide for considering how to organize your discussion guide. And then, so just this direct kind of how to go about doing it, guide format. So make sure you really read through that before you try and develop your discussion guide. And then there's some examples. Now, I do want to note that the focus group discussion guide for Knott's Berry Farm is very detailed. You'll notice some of these aren't quite as detailed. Those might be good kind of guides for you to work off of, but I do want to look at this discussion guide for Knott's Berry Farm just really quickly, because I know you've been looking at it because of your analysis this week, and I don't want you feeling overwhelmed with, oh my gosh, I have to develop something this in depth for my discussion guide for the assignment this week. Now, you do want to go ahead and include this information. There's more of this background information when you're doing a focus group and everybody has to be all on the same page. For one-on-one interviews, you can think about what they need to know and what they don't. You do want them to be doing the consent process, so you need to put that in there. I didn't ask you to develop those materials for this week, but if you actually do the study, you will need to do that part. So you want to include that in your kind of orientation. But down here for this focus group, you'll notice there's all these detailed prompts, restating of questions, because for inexperienced moderators, it can be really scary when you're, say, a question and no one responds and you just don't know what to do and you just jump to the next question. And so these prompts provide you with ideas for different ways to restate the question to kind of get people talking. But don't worry about that so much for this draft of your discussion guide. You can add some of those in if you find them. But for the most part, you just want to really focus on what are the main questions that you think are important to ask your participants to get the information that you need. So you might have 10 main questions with some sub questions under them. You might 10 to 15, maybe 20 at most, but we're not talking about this amount of detail. If you get that far, great, but I don't expect it. And when you're doing one-on-one interviews, it oftentimes isn't quite as detailed as this anyway, because you just have a little bit more flexibility when you're only dealing with one person at a time. Anyway, I hope that helps you consider what you need to do, but do take a look at the workshop for this week. Talk with your teammates in the discussion forum. That'll give me an opportunity to kind of see what you're thinking and help provide you with some guidance. But as you're working, please do not hesitate to reach out to me with questions that you have, clarifications that you need, ideas that you have, to see if that's okay. I welcome that input. I understand that this is really hard to do kind of in the dark without some input and guidance from me. So that's all I have for you today, but I look forward to hearing from you and see what you come up with. Thanks.